Hello YouTube. This video is about the recent events being called the hashtag BLM kidnapping. To the best of my knowledge, this is what happened. 4 black teenagers in Chicago kidnapped and tortured a white mentally disabled teen. They broadcast their abuse of the boy live on Facebook and appeared gleeful as they physically and verbally abused him. They also shouted things like, "Fuck Donald Trump" and "Fuck white people," which has turned this from a crime story into a political story. First off, let me say that obviously what these teens did is horrific, and the means by which it was done suggest to me that these people are psychopaths who don't hold moral values in line with functioning in a civil society. Given their age, I hope that there is at least an attempt to educate and rehabilitate these people, because if they are just given a jail sentence, when they get out, they'll probably just cause even more pain and suffering. I became aware of this first on Twitter, mostly by people pointing out the media's hypocritical reaction to these events. One look at the BLM kidnapping hashtag will reveal many examples of headlines and articles strangely avoiding the issue of race and politics when reporting the story. What makes this hypocritical is that these same news outlets would certainly be mentioning race and politics had this been 4 white teens doing this to a black teen while shouting "fuck Hillary Clinton" and "fuck black people." This reaction by the media is not very surprising to me, anyway, because this fits with the trend wherein issues of race only matter when they negatively affect non-white people or positively affect white people. And political issues function in much the same way, but in that case, which political issue is favored depends on the biases of the person or media outlet in question. One issue I find with this situation is that too many people, I find, are actually calling for this to be labeled a hate crime, rather than using this example to convince everyone that the idea of hate crimes should be done away with. And for anyone claiming this won't be labeled a hate crime, here's a quote from the Chicago police superintendent. And just a quick update, I'm making this after recording the video, they have now actually charged these people with a hate crime. So just because the mainstream media won't call it a hate crime, it does not automatically follow that the police will refuse to do so. But my issue here is that people are falling into the trap of becoming the people they claim to criticize. It's a very short journey from calling out hypocrites who don't label something as a hate crime to becoming the type of person who advocates for things to be labeled as hate crimes. And if it's not clear, the reason the idea of hate crimes is a bad thing is because it gives special status to crimes motivated by things like race or gender, as if such crimes are somehow worse or more painful than crimes committed for other reasons. For example, if these people had kidnapped and tortured this kid because he watches anime, that wouldn't qualify as a hate crime. But would that actual crime be any different in terms of how harmful it is or how morally horrendous it is? I say no. The law says differently, and I think the law should change. The next thing this situation brings up is the fact that it's called the BLM kidnapping, despite Black Lives Matter not even being mentioned in the live stream, and none of the perpetrators, as far as I know, being proven members of Black Lives Matter. The justification for this name is that Black Lives Matter is responsible for creating the environment wherein this kind of thing is acceptable or encouraged. I'm of two minds about this. On the one hand, I don't mind Black Lives Matter being smeared because I dislike the movement, and I think it does need to be taken down a peg and ultimately done away with. My main reason is that they took a real issue in excessive police violence and made it exclusively about race, thereby making it more difficult to actually solve the issue effectively. On the other hand, my experience with Gamergate has made me wary of anyone making accusations against or trying to smear an entire hashtag movement based on the actions of a few people who may or may not even be part of the movement. As such, I think it's wrong to label this crime with the Black Lives Matter label until such time as there is proof that these people were influenced by or were members of Black Lives Matter. Otherwise, I'd be no better than the people who blamed Gamergate anytime a feminist was the target of harassment or death threats, because elements of Gamergate did foster an environment in which hatred of feminists was acceptable or encouraged. So what can Black Lives Matter do to prevent themselves from being smeared by events of this sort? Well, as a start, they can condemn them, and that's exactly what Black Lives Matter Chicago did on Twitter. But here's the thing. People will see that condemnation, and it won't change a thing. People who think Black Lives Matter is a racist, anti-white movement are going to continue to hold them responsible, at least in part, for this kidnapping and abuse. Why? Because saying we condemn it is just words. What people want to see from Black Lives Matter before they'll really believe they condemn it is for them to treat this instance of racism and violence the same way they treat it if the victim were black and the kidnappers were white. So if prominent Black Lives Matter members wrote articles, made videos, and gave interviews where they condemn the racism and the violence of these 4 teens, then people would start to believe that Black Lives Matter does not actually condone this kind of thing. But that's not likely to happen. The main reason it won't, I think, is because Black Lives Matter is, and has always been, a group of people focused on black victims. It's right there in the name. So expecting them to suddenly start focusing on victims of other races is downright silly. They're obviously biased towards talking about just black victims. They should be criticized for that bias, but they shouldn't be expected to not have that bias. The other reasons are that for most people, there's no need to condemn kidnapping and torture because it's so obviously wrong. And of course, there's always the chance that for some Black Lives Matter supporters, they don't think there's anything wrong with the kidnapping and torture of white people. But just because Black Lives Matter doesn't give this the focus they'd give if it were black victims, you can't just assume that the whole movement condones these actions. Their bias in favor of black victims is a much more likely explanation, and they should be criticized on that level. In the end, though, this was just a horrible, senseless action, and I hope the victim and his families are okay. The one silver lining I see here is that the hypocritical way many people are reacting to this may cause more people than ever to become aware of just how ridiculous and wrong the current mainstream social justice mindset is. It sometimes takes something horrible like this to do that. Since kidnapping and torturing a mentally ill person is obviously a horrendous thing to do, if a celebrity or news organization or whoever doesn't condemn it as a horrendous thing, it's going to raise a lot of red flags for people. Likewise, if the kidnappers are literally shouting, "Fuck white people," and commentators refuse to call that racism, that again is going to raise some red flags for people. Events like this, horrible as they may be, serve as a way for politically uninvolved or otherwise ignorant people to become aware of the unfairness and hypocrisy rampant in mainstream Western society. As I've said before, things are likely going to have to get a lot worse before enough people become aware of what's going on to start demanding change. This is an example of that. I just hope things don't swing too far in the other direction. There's a big danger here that events like this could breed more hatred and division. If you see someone using this as an excuse to promote hatred of black people, understand that they're part of the problem. Don't be part of the problem. Until next time, I'm positive improvement, and I wish you all the best.